Okay, so this morning I'm going to be listening to the second violin sonata of Charles Ives. The date I have on this is 1910, but this publication is from 1951. So we're continuing this pattern of pieces which were written much earlier in Ives' career and only published towards the end of his life. Like this would have been published 6 years before he died. And if you look for information on the writing of this piece, it's like you'll see 1910. This article says 1917, so he spent a number of years revising it and was working on multiple violin sonatas at the same time. He probably finished this one after the fourth, which is the one we looked at yesterday. Let's just have a brief look at it, and I think it's in 3 movements. Let me see. So the first movement's Autumn. The second one is titled In the Barn, the second movement. And the third movement is titled The Revival. Okay, so I don't think there's a program note at the end of this one. Yeah, here we have like 1906, 1909 to 1910. I mean, again, it's like a period of 10 years he was composing this thing, and then it was published 40 years after that. These titles might have something to do with his upbringing. He grew up in Danbury, Connecticut, and lived sort of a rural lifestyle, a small town lifestyle, and the first title is Autumn, which is evocative of nature. The second title does evoke sort of a farm. And the third title, The Revival, is religious, certainly. The fourth sonata that we looked at, Ives was talking about his experiences at summer camp, which was quite religious and basically Bible camp. This is a point in America where basically everybody was Christian, and it was a Christian nation, and a lot of patriotism and Americana is like deeply tied to Christianity. So it's safe to assume that Ives's conception of nationalism and his idea of being this nationalist composer himself, it was tied to Christianity. It wasn't that he was writing sacred music necessarily, but that was where he was getting a lot of his musical material. You can sort of see he has a lot of subtle changes in tempo and like interesting switches in meter. All these surface details kind of remind me of like early Bartók pieces. Like Bartók's first string quartet, for example. Yeah, extreme dynamics. Both musicians are constantly playing. And yeah, let's see if I can find any other info, and then we will get into it. Yeah, so it doesn't really there isn't really a lot of info on this, and it seems like Ives purposefully did not leave a program note or any sort of interpretation, and it seems like the bulk of this piece is in the first movement. That's where a lot of the romanticism will be, and then we should expect this second movement to have a lot of fiddle tunes, a lot of like ragtime popular music. And then the third movement might be similar to some of the things we were hearing in the fourth violin sonata, where he's evoking like the religious experience of uh, being at summer camp and singing hymn tunes, or maybe singing those same tunes as an adult. If you need to listen along, there's a link in the description, and I will comment on this in just a bit. Yeah, this was definitely um, a very romantic piece, kind of like my experience of the fourth sonata. It's like, yeah, hyper romantic, incredibly romantic sounding. This video that I ended up looking at does have some program notes. I'm assuming they took it from the sleeve to the CD that they used for the recording. Um, and give you a little bit more context what hymns are being quoted exactly. You probably caught the one that was in the last movement, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. There's like a couple ones in the barn that are hinted at, like Turkey in the Straw, Battle Cry of Freedom, and then Bathelamon's hymn is sort of the main hymn that appears in the first movement, but it's a little bit more abstract. Um, the final movement, it seems, was supposed to be the fourth movement to the fourth violin sonata, which we looked at yesterday, and I think it could have really worked in that context, but I like that it's here instead, because it's my favorite movement of this one. Actually, it's really nice. The It's a nice finale. It's easier to listen to than the first two movements. It's slow and it sits on its harmonies long enough that you can really enjoy the dissonances, and it sounds almost like Debussy at times, and it's just very nice. And it ends in C, kind of like the second movement. So the quotation's super clear at the end, has a nice little climax. The second movement I found was definitely the most rhythmic movement. It has a really nice transition from these 2/4 fast ideas to a 3/4 section. This transition was like super cool, and the tied stuff in the violin really obscured the motion to 3/4, and it was very just interesting rhythmically. And one thing I noticed that was common to the first two movements was his bass lines have a tendency to just descend by step, and regardless of how complicated the stuff above it is going, it's like there's this constant like descending down that's happening in the bass, which is definitely like contrapuntal sensibility just working its way, I think, intuitively into his writing. I found myself listening to the bass line a lot because it's very difficult to make sense of his turns of harmony if you don't. He'll have like a descending bass line, and he'll add like little chromatic motions in it and like vary up how fast it's descending, and that's his sort of like, in my opinion, his primary way of like getting to different tonal areas. It's always like he sort of avoids jumping by fifth and back down to create a sort of sequence. He just goes straight for the like scalar motion, and then adds some sort of modal mixture into it, and that part writing gets fleshed out into these like crazy chords and turns of harmony, which I think are very romantic sounding. Like this first movement is probably the most complex of the three, and it really avoids cadences. Like you don't get a clear cadence until the end. It's in A major, as it turns out. Um, but you would have no idea just looking at it that that's how it's going to end. And I can see how this type of writing takes a lot of time because it's clearly intuitively written, but he's trying to make it as, you know, saturated as possible. Wagner famously took a very long time writing his pieces, and I think it's a similar style of composing. His decision to make four violin sonatas is really smart because the violin has this sort of cultural identity that it could be like this high romantic soloist from Europe, or it could be a fiddler in rural America just sawing away at Turkey in the Straw or whatever. So it has this sort of like dual identity that really serves Ives' nationalistic project, and it's really cool. And I think for that reason alone, these are worth looking at and worth programming if you are uh, putting together a violin program and you want something that's high romantic but like a little bit out there, then I would go for maybe the fourth one if you want something lighter, or this one if you want something that's like a real showstopper and really virtuosic. And the only barrier to performance I think is how hard the piano parts are, but maybe you can find a really interested pianist who is basically a soloist and wants to show off alongside you. So that's my thoughts on the Ives today. We're not out of the waters yet in this series because I still want to look at one piece for violin, piano, and electronics just to round out the whole series, and then we can move on to something else. That'll be around the new year, so I might take a few days off again for just New Year's Day, and then we'll start looking at pieces that are a little bit bigger in terms of instrumentation. So, yeah, I'm excited.